You mentioned Golden State, which is now going through a transition of its own. Klay Thompson officially gone from the Warriors, 3-year deal, $50 million with Dallas. Thompson chooses the Mavericks over the Lakers. From what I heard, it's a lot of financial reasons, Mark. I mean, I don't know if the Lakers could have offered what the Mavericks did. I don't think so. But even if they could match the dollar offer, the taxes are totally different in California and Texas. Like, there's just so much more money Klay Thompson's going to make by playing in Texas with the Mavericks. And look, I think he's a decent fit, playing opposite Kyrie and Luka Doncic. Both those guys are magnets for defensive attention. And even though Klay's shooting numbers went down to like 38% last season, I think the looks he's going to get in Dallas might even be better than what he was getting in Golden State next year. So I love the deal for the Dallas Mavericks. Let's start there. I mean, how much better did the Mavericks get with Klay Thompson? And I guess we can talk a little bit about how they kind of swapped out Najee Marshall for Derrick Jones Jr. At the small forward position.
Yeah, I mean, they got substantially better because the last two off seasons, the strategy has been, let's try to get great supporting cast players so that's not just Luka and Kyrie. I mean, obviously it starts with them, but how do we make life easier for them so that they're not always getting double teams? And if they are getting double teams, they find open guys that can make shots. Obviously, Klay can do that with his outside shooting. I think even though he went through some frustrations this past season with accepting a bench role, in fairness, he's shown adaptability and being able to excel in that. So I don't think it's going to get to that point. But if there are times where Jason Kidd feels like, hey, let's stagger lineups, there is flexibility to that. I think, though, that Klay Thompson defensively is not anywhere near what he could ever restore pre-ACL injury in 2019. He's been a willing defender, but he's not that lockdown defender that he once was. And so that's really the real limitation that I don't think that that's ever going to be restored. But to your point about Dallas, Lakers, I think the Lakers fit was fine too for almost the exact same reasons. And even though he wouldn't provide as much point of attack defense, they got good front court depth with Anthony Davis to help most notably. But I think really the sticking point is the Warriors didn't view the Lakers as viable sign and trade candidates. I mean, they didn't really have assets they wanted. I think most notably, they didn't have any interest in D'Angelo Russell. They had a lot of familiarity with what he could provide. Ironically, they got D'Angelo Russell in that sign and trade with Kevin Durant. And part of it was because they knew Klay Thompson was out for that whole 2019-20 year. And while they didn't anticipate Steph Curry being out only 4 games into that season, they saw, for better and for worse, what D'Angelo Russell can provide. Good playmaking, but inconsistent as a shooter. Has flashes of great shooting, but then lots of games where he can't hit a shot. And then defensively, yeah, he's shown improvements, but nothing dramatic. And they didn't have interest in relitigating that again.
So now you got the Warriors sitting out there with Steph, who's still playing at a high level. Draymond still playing at kind of a B level for Draymond. Not quite the defensive player he used to be, but still an effective guy, especially as a playmaker on the offensive end. But, around them, you've got, Kuminga, you've got Moody, you've got Andrew Wiggins, you got Kevon Looney. But what else? This was a team that didn't make the playoffs last year. I don't know what their play is, Mark. I don't know where they go from here. Again, I sort of take it, and I say this all the time here on the show, but I kind of watched GMs work most closely in Boston, where Danny Ainge operated, where Danny was always like, you know what, we're either going to be really good or going to be really bad. And look, the reality is a lot of great teams are built that way. The teams that we've seen built, recently, Boston was really bad for a number of years. Oklahoma City had that one terribly, it was 29 games in a row or something that one year. Denver had down years. The Warriors right now are kind of on the precipice here. I don't know what move they can make to build a winner around Steph. DeMar DeRozan is still out there as a possibility for both the Warriors and the Lakers, I guess. But I don't know if DeRozan at this stage moves the needle, not substantially. So I don't know where the Warriors go from here, Mark. Chris Paul's now gone. Klay Thompson is now gone. Like, it just feels like they've got Steph and a lottery team around him. What are you seeing?
Yeah, and I think the other thing, they really missed an opportunity. I mean, obviously it takes two to tango, but ideally their hope was that they could package some combination with Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins and get something in return. And they weren't able to do that with Chris Paul, and they just waived him. There's still hope that maybe at some point now or leading into the trade deadline, they can do that with Andrew Wiggins, but Andrew just hasn't been the same player that he was during the 2022 championship season. So his value is going down. This might be, I think, their way of rationalizing and also some fool's gold, but this is what their current thought process is. Clearly, the dynasty years are over. They have been over for a while. This is just another signal of it. But they do think there is a pathway for them to at least be a playoff team because, yeah, Steph Curry is still playing at a high level. But while they're not naive to think that Draymond will never have another injury, never get a technical or get ejected, they have relative optimism that his severity of absences last season won't be duplicated. So he'll be more available. And when Draymond's been on the court, with exception of the officials, he's been a good defender.
Yeah, that's where you lose me. This is where you're losing me. You're losing me. Like, they have a level. What was the phrase there? A level of optimism that Draymond won't.
Will be more available.
Yes. We're basing that on.
They are not saying he's never going to get another technical or another.
Are we crossing our fingers and hoping?
They're saying severity that
wish
he's
upon a star
more available than last season. The third part, and this is realistic, is that Jonathan Kuminga and Brandon Podziemski and Moses, they're going to develop more and more. So what does that get them? No, championship's out the window, but at least there's a pathway where they can be a playoff team. But again, everything has to hit right. And to your point, I share the skepticism about Draymond avoiding injuries or any suspensions. But again, last season was such a cluster, with him, that there's no way that it can't go up, right?
Well, it's not impossible that it can go down too, right? Last season was a mess, but it was a mess of his own making. It wasn't like there was some outside influence here. Like, Draymond self-destructed for parts of the season, and the Warriors paid the price for it. Now they're down Klay Thompson. They're down Chris Paul. Chris Paul was pretty good, in the games that he played, especially early on. Like, his numbers are not bad. And they're counting on these young guys to take not just one, but probably 2 or 3 steps forward. Like, I agree. I think these guys can play. I think Podziemski can play. I think Kuminga can play. Less certain about Moody, but there's certainly potential there. But again, like, the ceiling is relatively low for that. Like, the ceiling is the play-in, maybe the 6th seed. Maybe, but I'm still thinking play-in might be their top level. Like, the reality is, like, if you're just looking at this objectively, the course of action is to trade Steph Curry. They're not going to do it. I'm not sitting there suggesting that. But that's the most prudent way to go. Like, you've got decent young talent on your roster. You put Steph on the market, you're probably going to get a boatload back, whether it's draft picks or young players. I don't know. Like, I guess it's more important to keep Steph in a Warriors uniform for the totality of his career. But Mark, you and I both know that doesn't happen really anymore. Like, guys want to wind up playing, years past when their franchise wants to keep paying them. And that's just the reality of the situation. Like, if you're the Warriors, to me, your pathway is to trade Steph to a contender that, wants to give you a ton back in return. Trade Draymond to, like, Detroit. You'd probably take him up there with that contract and rebuild. Like, rebuild. They've got their draft capital. Like, it's not, they're on the same position as the Clippers. Like, they've got their draft picks. And in fact, I think they've got a couple extra ones too in the coming years. They're not going to do it. I'm not sitting here saying they're going to do it. In fact, I'm actively sitting here saying they're not going to do it. But like, one option is to bring as many talented players as you can back and compete for a play-in spot. It's a team that won 4 championships. Draymond used to call the NBA playoffs the Warriors Invitational. Like, this was a championship level team.